You know, if you want to know when history really truly changed course, when all the structures of society and commerce and just daily life were completely remade, you don't actually look at the blueprints of the machines.
No, you don't.
You look at the vocabulary.
Language is the ultimate social ledger. I mean, when a society goes through a transformation like the Industrial Revolution, the language has to adapt.
Yeah.
It becomes useless.
How do you even describe something you've never seen before?
Exactly. How do you talk about an invisible power source
Mm-hmm.
or a machine that moves by itself and can cross a country in, what, half the time it used to take?
And that right there is the heart of our mission today. We are doing a deep dive into the late modern English era, so roughly 1800 to 1900.
A century defined by smoke, steel, and speed.
And all of that forced the English language to evolve at well, a breakneck pace.
Yeah, and our sources really confirm this. This era wasn't just about inventing things. It was about linguistic management. All that technological progress led to two really critical outcomes.
Oh.
First, you get this massive kind of chaotic explosion of new industrial words. And then, right on its heels, comes this fierce, systemic drive to create linguistic order, standardization.
I think we sometimes forget just how insane the speed of change was for people living through it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, imagine it's 1810. Your whole world runs on manual labor, maybe some water power, and basically the speed of a horse.
Right.
Then you jump forward just 30 years, and suddenly you've got factories running on steam, cities are getting wired for light, and people are traveling on iron rails faster than anyone ever thought was possible.
It's the language equivalent of a system shock.
Yeah.
It really is. You had new tech appearing so fast that, scholars and dictionaries just couldn't keep up.
And I imagine the communication had to be perfect.
It had to be crystal clear to scale globally, to get funding, and frankly, to stop things from blowing up.
So let's start there. With the source of all that pressure, technological progress, it was the absolute engine, and we will definitely come back to that word driving this whole expansion of vocabulary.
It really was.
Yeah.
Previous eras could kind of get by with the more general, more literary vocabulary.
Sure.
But when you're dealing with parts that have to be interchangeable or calculating the financial risk of a multi-million-dollar railway, words have to change. They go from just description to actual specification.
They have to mean something measurable, unambiguous.
Yes.
So let's spend some time on a few of the specific words that really defined this era, because these weren't just labels, were they? They were like anchors for whole new ways of living.
That's a great way to put it. They formed the core industrial lexicon. We could start with engine.
Okay, engine.
Before 1800, like you said, an engine could be any kind of clever contraption, a military device maybe, or even just a scheme.
Yeah.
It had this sort of wonderfully ambiguous, almost medieval feel to it.
Right, so the Industrial Revolution didn't invent the word engine, it just completely redefined it. I'm thinking of James Watt's improvements, the move to rotary motion. What did that do to the word itself?
It gave the word engine measurable, quantifiable power. Suddenly, you're not just talking about a device. You're talking about horsepower, efficiency, piston stroke, fuel consumption.
It's all that ambiguity that was fine in the 17th century.
It becomes a catastrophic liability. Imagine ordering a precision part that's worth thousands of pounds. You can't have any ambiguity there.
So the word's meaning just becomes incredibly dense with technical detail. It starts to embody this whole new economic power.
Exactly. And then that forces a whole cascade of other new words to describe how the engine works. So you see the rise of words like piston, boiler, throttle.
And horsepower, which is fascinating.
That's a brilliant term. A standardized measurement invented specifically to compare the output of these new machines to the traditional labor of a horse. It's an entire intellectual leap hidden inside a simple name.
Okay, moving from mechanical power to maybe the most transformative but at first invisible force, electricity.
Right.
When does that word go from being a sort of academic curiosity to an industrial force that everybody needs to be able to talk about?
Well, the 19th century is when electricity moves out of the lecture hall, Faraday's demonstrations and all that, and into commercial use. The word itself was already there from Greek, but it's popular. Its industrial usage just explodes after about 1850.
And the word electricity couldn't have just arrived by itself. It must have dragged a whole new vocabulary along with it.
It did, because you couldn't just talk about the force. You had to manage it. You had to quantify it. You had to charge people for it.
That's where the units come in.
That's exactly where they come in. To actually use electricity, you needed consistent definitions across the globe. So suddenly, the names of the great scientists Volt, ampere, ohm. They become common words.
Highly technical, standardized units.
And they had to be universally understood for the whole system to work. If I order a 100 ohm resistor in London, it has to be the exact same thing as a resistor made in New York. The word becomes the specification.
Wow. So the standardization of the language actually comes before and enables the massive commercial scale-up.
It's a prerequisite. It has to be.
And that brings us to the ultimate symbol of all this, of industrial mobility, the locomotive.
The locomotive is probably the cleanest example of a new technology just demanding a completely new word.
Yeah.
It combines locus for place and motivus for causing motion. It's brilliantly self-explanatory.
Before this, if you wanted to move something heavy, you had what? Animals and canals. And now, all of a sudden, you have a self-propelled machine hauling tons of stuff across huge distances.
At speeds that were just unimaginable before. And the word locomotive came to stand for the whole railway system. It spawned an entire lexicon of its own.
You mean words for the tracks and...
Right, you need rail.
Yeah.
And then you need words for management, like schedule and timetable. Safety words like signal. And of course, the commercial words. Ticket, fare. The locomotive wasn't just a machine. It was the linguistic foundation for our modern ideas of speed and logistics.
Okay, so it's clear that all this progress was providing the raw material, the new things that needed names. But if you have hundreds of these terms just appearing every year, how did society avoid, well, drowning in linguistic chaos?
It couldn't afford to. Chaos is the absolute antithesis of the industrial mindset.
Right.
Mass production, global trade, scientific collaboration, all of it requires total predictability.
Yeah.
If you have 1,000 patents being filed and every inventor is spelling the same part a different way, the entire system just grinds to a halt.
So if invention was the gas pedal, standardization was the brake and the steering wheel.
That's a perfect analogy.
And we usually think of dictionaries doing this work, but what was so special about the dictionaries of the 19th century?
Well, this is when dictionaries really changed. They went from being, these records compiled by a single scholar to being massive, systematic, data-driven projects. The most famous, of course, being the effort that became the Oxford English Dictionary.
So they weren't just observing language anymore.
No, they were actively exercising linguistic control. That's the key shift. They weren't passive observers. They were active formalizers.
So how did they do that? What was the actual mechanism of control? How did they make sure the words from the factories and labs made it into the lexicon in a consistent way?
They formalized two things, and they were under immense commercial pressure to do it. First, the standardization of spelling.
Because of mass printing?
Exactly. Newspapers, technical manuals, commercial catalogs. Consistency in spelling was suddenly vital. If a technical term like, say, sulfate or cylinder is spelled 6 different ways, it introduces massive friction into trade and manufacturing.
It's almost like a quality control stamp. Consistent spelling means a word is legitimate.
Precisely. It cut down on confusion in contracts and scientific papers. But the second pillar of standardization was even more important for industrial growth.
Which was?
The standardization of meaning.
Why did fixing the meaning of a word like engine suddenly matter so much more than it had 100 years earlier?
Because of complexity and interchangeability. Industrial operations became so incredibly complex with these intricate supply chains. You needed absolute assurance that when an engineer wrote 10 horsepower boiler, everyone, from the apprentice welder to the iron supplier hundreds of miles away, understood the exact same thing.
So standardizing the meaning was what made the language reliable enough to trade on.
Yes. It created the coherence you needed for these massive, intricate operations.
I have to wonder, though, was this all happening just inside the walls of the dictionary projects? Or were other groups involved? Like, was the patent office playing a role?
Absolutely. The dictionaries were sort of the final judges, but the pressure was coming from industry itself. Professional societies, like the Institution of Civil Engineers, they started publishing their own glossaries.
To get everyone on the same page.
And yes, the patent system was a huge driver. It required inventors to define their terms with just unparalleled clarity to get legal protection. If your language was ambiguous, your invention could be stolen or challenged. Legal risk is a powerful motivator for precision.
So linguistic standardization was actually an economic necessity. It wasn't just some academic project.
It was the bedrock of trust. In a really high-stakes, fast-changing economy, think about words for raw materials like pig iron or coke. They had to mean the same thing every time, everywhere, because millions of pounds were being staked on the consistency of that material.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. All that energy and excitement of discovery, the promise of electricity, the speed of a locomotive, it created this need for an equally vast, organized, almost bureaucratic response from the language side. Let me ask you this. For anyone listening today who's just bombarded with new tech terms all the time, Web3, blockchain, generative AI, was there a sense back then that the language was being ruined by all this jargon?
Oh, there was constant tension, yes. The older sort of literary classes often pushed back against what they saw as this vulgar, technical jargon.
But what was the difference?
The difference, I think, was that the industrial terms were standardized relatively quickly by very clear commercial forces. They had to be precise to function.
Yeah.
A word like turbine or telegraphy might have sounded cold and technical, but its meaning was pretty much fixed within a decade because the economy depended on it.
That's a huge distinction. Precision driven by commerce versus, novelty driven by communication today.
The stakes were just different. A failure to standardize a term in the 19th century could mean a factory explodes or a train crashes. The necessity was absolute.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize the core takeaway here for our listener. If we look at that period, 1800 to 1900, the Industrial Revolution basically did two things to English. It demanded a flood of new words, and then it forced them into a lexicon that was precise enough to run a complex, modern industrial society.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture, you see this direct, really powerful link between massive economic change and the formalization of language. Standardizing language became this essential, invisible piece of infrastructure for the industrial state.
It's a process we're still seeing every day, right?
We are.
Every time you have to learn a new term for a software update or a new social media feature, you are living through the same linguistic pressure that gave us engine and electricity. New concepts need new words.
And then the struggle begins to fix the meaning of those words.
Yeah.
We're living through the modern version of that standardization imperative. But now the language adapts in real time, often through, informal channels like developer forums, before any traditional institution can catch up.
So the history of English isn't just about dusty old books. It's a living history, and it's driven by human ingenuity and the relentless demands of progress.
Exactly. We saw an era defined by tech, creating words like engine, electricity, and locomotive, and then these formal institutions, driven by commercial need, stepping in to stabilize the language by standardizing spelling and meaning.
And that stability, that required standardization, brings us to our final provocative thought for today. In the 19th century, you had the printing press and determined lexicographers who could eventually impose order on the vocabulary.
Right, because the technology moved relatively slowly and the medium of communication was fixed. It was print.
But what happens today, when the speed of technological progress, especially in digital spaces, is just exponentially faster than anything they could have imagined?
And the terms are introduced instantly, globally, through social media and platforms that are constantly changing, long before any formal body even has a chance to debate a definition.
So if progress requires standardization to function, what does it mean for us when the standardization of meaning is decentralized, instantaneous, and often, temporary? Are we still even able to create a universal, agreed-upon lexicon in an age of such radical velocity?
It's definitely something to think about.